Yeah. But yes, welcome. Olkaa hyvä.
Mä aloitan tämän. Saadaanko me tuosta vielä tuo lappu edestä pois?
No.
Kiitos. Okay, good morning, good afternoon to you all here at the National Museum in Finland and all the participants online. We have a hybrid seminar and webinar at the same time, so technically this will be also an adventure, hopefully also content-wise. So welcome to this autumn webinar of the TAKO Network for Collection Management and Contemporary Documenting in Finland. Tervetuloa TAKOn syysseminaariin. Tämän ensimmäisen seminaariosuuden kieli on englanti. The first part of the autumn webinar shall be in English. Welcome to you all. My name is Ulla Salmela. I work as Director of Development at the Finnish Heritage Agency here in Helsinki, and I will chair the first part of the autumn webinar. This webinar is part of the project Collecting with Care, Ethics in Museum Work. And this project has been carried out by the International Council of Museums, International Committee for Collecting, and International Committee on Ethical Dilemmas. In the next hour and a half, we shall focus on documenting and collecting the COVID-19 in the Nordic countries, specifically in Finland and Denmark. Our brilliant keynote speakers are MA Curator Maria Ollila from the National Museum Finland and MA Archivist Bente Jensen from Aalborg City Archives in Denmark. They will shed light on different aspects on collecting, the pandemic in the Nordic countries, as well as ethical points of view. After the keynotes, there will be time for discussion and questions, so please be prepared for that here in the National Museum Finland and online as well. The chat will be open during the webinar, so please use it as well. But first, we shall hear words of welcome from Johanna Jakomaa, the chair of TAKO Network. And after her, we will hear from Alexandra Bonia, Secretary of COMCOL, ICOM International Committee for Collecting. But first, Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all of you online, and good afternoon to all of you here on site. My name is Johanna Jakomaa, and I am very happy to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of TAKO Network. Thank you all for being here, online or in person. TAKO is a network for collections management and contemporary documenting here in Finland, established in 2009. Our aim is to improve collections management in museums by learning together. We promote contemporary collecting and collaboration between museums in many ways. We bring collection professionals together to share knowledge in seminars and in thematic working groups. We also maintain a nationwide division of collecting duties. Over 100 professionally managed museums are active members of the network. We at TAKO are very happy to be a part of this project. During this historical pandemic, in the midst of fears, worries, and exhausting restrictions, museum professionals all around the world have managed to cooperate, to find new partnerships, and come up with new ideas, such as this project and its important goals, to learn more about ethical collecting and to build better collections for all of us on every continent. For TAKO Network, this is hopefully a start of more active international collaboration. I believe we have a lot to learn and a lot to give too. I want to thank IC Ethics, COMCOL, ICOM Secretariat, our team here on site, and all our partner organizations for making this event possible. I look forward on hearing today's interesting presentations by our great colleagues Maria and Bente, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johanna, for these words. It's difficult to know whether to give you a big hand or not, because the practice has been changed during the pandemic, also this practice. But next we shall have opening words and words of welcome from Alexandra Bonia, the Secretary of Comcol. Welcome, Alexandra, to be part of this webinar, and we hope to hear from you next. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be among you today. There is a reflection. I don't know if we can stop that, because I can hear my voice many times.
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
But
okay,
I will close
great.
the microphone here, so that might help you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. It is my great pleasure to welcome everybody online and physically in Finland this morning on behalf of Comcol, the International Committee of Collecting, the International Committee of ICOM on Collecting. During the last few years, more and more cultural institutions, cultural heritage institutions, realize the need to use their power and resources to address issues that have caused and/or continue to cause cultural traumas. From the current pandemic to global warming, decolonization, violence, and social inequalities, cultural traumas leave marks on individuals and societies alike. Museums and heritage institutions can become the spaces of public acknowledgement of trauma. They can enable representation of traumatic experiences, and therefore they can mediate to or facilitate healing on an individual and societal scale. However, this process does not come without challenges. So this project, the Solidarity Project, of which this webinar is a part, was developed in order to discuss how museums and museum professionals need to reflect on practical and ethical considerations when working on and about traumatic experiences in their institutions. Starting from the recent experience of COVID-19 and the multiplicity of challenges it has led to, we wanted and we want to discuss various ethical considerations about who, how, and why this experience was collected and presented in different institutions. I would like just to mention our partners, if I may. So it is with a great pleasure that we have collaborated for this Solidarity Project with TAKO, of course, but also the International Committee of ICOM, IC Ethics, and a series of museums and institutions around the world. Museum Casa della Memoria, Museo Mio, District 6 Museum, the Illinois State Museum, the National Museum of Australia, and a consortium of institutions from Taiwan, among them the Chinese Association of Museums in Taiwan, the National Taiwan University of Arts, the National Museum of Taiwan History, and the National Chiao Tung University are the partners in this project. I'm sure that we're going to have a wonderful webinar ahead, and I thank you very, very much for your collaboration and for organizing this activity and participating to this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for these words. I think they shed a light on the impressive selection of partners as well in this work, documenting cultural traumas and discussing the ethical questions. Thank you. And now we were all. I have a small intro before I let Maria take the next presentation. I'm sure we were all taken by surprise when the COVID-19 crisis erupted, and as you heard, cultural trauma. It caused also a cultural trauma last spring, and we've been taking this dose of COVID since then. But museums reacted very rapidly, and as the result of this rapid reaction, the pandemic has been richly documented. And next, we shall hear from Maria Ollila from the National Museum Finland, how they, with the picture collections of the Finnish Heritage Agency, explored and documented the sectors critical to the functioning of the society, such as the COVID-19 healthcare and parliamentary work. And Maria will also describe the challenges met during this work. So Maria, now it's your turn.
Okay, so thank you, Ulla. Dear colleagues, I'm Maria Ollila from the National Museum of Finland. It's great to be here, both with the live audience and online. just a moment and I'll share my presentation. Okay, I think you should be able to see it now. Yes. So, collecting the COVID-19's effect on society, how did the critical sectors act in Finland? I'll discuss how the National Museum of Finland, together with the picture collections of the Finnish Heritage Agency, documented and explored the action of the sectors that are critical to the functioning of the society. And I'll show you examples of the ethical challenges we faced and how we solved them or tried to solve them. First, few words about our work in general. The National Museum of Finland documents contemporary phenomena and the turning points of society, as well as the government's actions and its interaction with people. Contemporary collecting is a part of our collection work on a regular basis. The documentation or collecting is carried out through various methods, such as interviews, photography, observation and collecting items. And our projects involve various partners, most importantly, the picture collections of the Finnish Heritage Agency. The museum is also a part of the agency, so we represent the same organization. And the agency operates under the Ministry of Education and Culture. We have quite a long tradition in documenting the turning points of society, even as they unfold. For example, there are around 300 objects and hundreds of photographs into collections from the battles of Helsinki in the Finnish Civil War in 1918. In Helsinki, the war ended in mid-April 1918, and the National Museum of Finland started to collect the war-related material April 25th by order from the Finnish Senate. On the right, you can see shoes of a Red Guard soldier. These shoes were collected in the spring of 1918 from an old hospital. The building was called the Cholera Barracks, and soldiers who died in the battle, Reds, White, or German, were gathered at the barracks. The photo is a street view from Helsinki from the same time. The main guardhouse is on the left. Over the last few years, we have documented phenomena such as the environmental impact of plastic, civic activism related to climate change, and costume culture of Romani in Finland. Okay, now I seem to have trouble changing the slide. Yes. Okay, about collecting the COVID-19. When the pandemic started last year, we recognized early on that we are living and witnessing a historical time, even a turning point, you could say. So we started documenting and collecting the COVID-19 in mid-March 2020. We discussed about the themes and the viewpoints with other Finnish museums, mostly via the TAKO Network. And we also discussed with other memory organizations, such as the Finnish Literature Society, which had the public online call out for collecting the feelings and experiences during the pandemic. So what did we do? We started a documenting project that is mostly museum initiated and actually still ongoing. And together with the picture collections, we have documented the crisis from various viewpoints, but we have mostly focused on the society, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our society, and even more specifically on the sectors that are critical to the functioning of the society, and that is the healthcare, the parliamentary work, trade, border control, and so on, and also the employees, the frontline workers, you could say. We have displayed these themes and created results of our work in the National Museum's The Story of Finland exhibition since November 2020. And we have also opened most of the material online in finna.fi database, which is a public online database for anyone to explore. In cataloging the material, the Finnish museums have used the same vocabularies and ontologies. For example, the terms COVID-19 and koronadokumentointi, which is collecting coronavirus, and TAKO Network has coordinated this. Okay, let's move on. I'll tell you more about our projects and the related ethical questions. Updating the collecting practice. When the pandemic started in March 2020, we had to adapt to the new situation. Our contemporary collecting practice was ready, but basically we had to update it to the new safety regulations and instructions. And while planning and working on this, we had started remote work. Like many people working in specialist positions in Finland were able to do. What a privilege. And at the same time, some of us had to find a balance between work and family because the kids were suddenly at home. So it was quite a stressful situation. We set up a team of 3 to 8 people to plan and carry out the COVID-19 related collecting. We had regular team meetings and we kept in touch. And from the ethical point of view, we discussed about the uncertainty of the situation, the worries we had, and how safe we felt about doing the field work, and how we could minimize the risk for anyone involved. And on the basis of official safety regulations and our organization's regulations, we created our own safety guidance, which we updated whenever needed and followed it carefully. In spite of the situation, we didn't want to compromise our contemporary collecting practice, so we figured out new ways to execute it. We avoided physical contact with people if possible. We did the interviews online, made acquisitions online, filled the necessary forms and permissions via email, and took photos from a safe distance and so on. But we recognized that we also needed to continue the field work so that we would get a more comprehensive picture of this historical time. We agreed that it was voluntary to participate in face-to-face work for both the museum workers and, of course, our informants. We discussed with the informants and chose the most suitable way to cooperate. About the photo, the text in that piece of graffiti actually means stay at home, but we didn't quite follow that. Okay, documenting the restrictions on movement to and from Uusimaa region in April 2020 as safely as possible. The Uusimaa border was closed from March 28th to April 15th, 2020 to stop the coronavirus from spreading. And that also meant that the civil liberties were restricted, and it was quite a shock and had an impact on the everyday life of many people. We explored the legal grounds on this matter and also the consequence, that is the border control work at the closed border. This was the first project in which we collected both remotely and in fieldwork. I did remote interviews with 2 members of the Finnish Parliament and its Constitutional Law Committee on this matter, and they stated that even though limiting people's movement is a restriction on civil rights, the Constitutional Law Committee had reviewed these extraordinary measures and come to the conclusion that in this situation, other civil rights can be restricted to secure people's right to live. There was quite a lot of debate about this in Finland. We also documented the border control work of the police in action by photographing, observing, and also interviewing Jussi Päivänsalo, the superintendent who was in charge. Here you can see us during the interview by the closed border. That's Jussi Päivänsalo on the left, and on the right there's photographer Soile Tirilä, and that's me in the middle. We're following our own safety guidance at that time. We aren't wearing masks because it was not a common practice back then in Finland, and most of the border control work happened outdoors, so we were able to operate at a safe distance and so on. At that point, there wasn't comprehensive knowledge about the coronavirus, so in hindsight, you could possibly say that we took some risks while working. Looking back, we focused on practical safety-related questions and didn't discuss enough about meeting people with possible trauma. Life during the pandemic is stressful in many ways and many levels, and in this matter we should have been more prepared, even though we worked mainly with the frontline workers who are trained to operate in crisis. At the border of Uusimaa, we faced the police and the armed forces, and crisis management is their core competence. Documenting the work of COVID-19 ward nurses at the surgical hospital in June 2020. Another critical sector we documented was the healthcare.
Teamsista rättönen, niin se kuuluu sitten.
Eikö se ole mikrofoni?
Kyllähän se on. Okei, anteeksi, kun siellä oli jollain ongelma.
Okay, just a short technical break. We will continue. I guess that everybody can hear me. Okay, yes. Let's put this back on. And no worries. I'll just share my presentation again, I guess, and then we'll continue. Just a short break for everybody. Okay, so let's continue. About documenting the work of COVID-19 nurses. Just put that down. Yes, so another critical sector we documented was the healthcare for COVID-19 patients. We visited temporary COVID-19 ward at the surgical hospital in Helsinki. The COVID-19 ward was run by Helsinki and Uusimaa Hospital District, which is quite a hierarchical organization. And our aim was to interview nurses working with COVID-19 patients. And if we wanted to cooperate with the hospital district, we could only get in touch with the nurses via their superiors. The superiors actually gave us their contact information for the nurses we interviewed, so they basically chose them. We ended up interviewing two amazing nurses, both of them working with COVID-19 patients. Nurse Rosa Aaltonen on the left and intensive nurse Marko Kivioja on the right. We usually always arrange interviews directly with the interviewees, but in this case it wasn't possible. And later on we actually heard that no other operator or media had even had the access to the COVID-19 ward. So this time the setup was a bit different, but we made sure that we gave our interviewees extra space and acted perhaps even more sensitively than usually. In reality, both nurses seemed to be happy and willing to work with us. You could tell that the project was meaningful also to them as well, and they told unpromptedly about different aspects of their work, and also about the difficult and stressing matters, like the worry about getting sick and the coronavirus, sick of the coronavirus or their dissatisfaction with the pay. Then something about the importance of consent and narrative control. In the photo on the left, you can see my colleague, curator Anna-Mari Immonen, and intensive nurse Marko Kivioja just before the interview doing the necessary paperwork, permissions, etc. And if you look at the photos, we also collected items, their working clothes, and protective equipment. And these types of protective equipment were used at the COVID-19 intensive care unit of the surgical hospital in Helsinki in June 2020. You can see surgical mask, face shield, protective gloves, protective coat, hood-like hair protector, detachable sleeves, and plastic apron. And then about the sensitivity and consent. At the end of nearly every interview, 40 or so, we have done during collecting COVID-19, we have asked the interviewees the same set of questions that are more personal and try to capture the feelings and experience in living the pandemic. We always asked before starting the interview, would it be okay to ask these questions, and then respected the interviewees' wishes. It is understandable if you don't want to share about your personal experience or personal life while representing your organization and talking about your work. But still, most of the interviewees wanted also to share about their personal views in their own terms. They chose the level of privacy they wanted to share. So even though most of the interviewees were frontline workers talking about their work, we also managed to collect the personal experience. In this case, we also asked permission from the nurses in advance about asking if they were trade unionists. Their trade union was quite active, and we wanted to ask the nurses if they felt they got enough support. Interviewees' feelings about the interview might change. For example, one of the nurses asked us to remove a 16-second part of around the 40 minutes long interview later on. For us, its content was quite trivial, but for the interviewee, it was something sensitive. And we, of course, agreed. It was a question about consent and narrative control. We wanted to enable the narrative control to the interviewee so that the story would be in a person's own words. Okay, here you can see maybe something a bit more familiar. It's a coronavirus test set. A few months ago, we got a coronavirus test set to our collection from the Helsinki and Uusimaa Hospital District as well. This is a typical object for the pandemic time, something that many of us have also experienced in the last year or so. In our collection, this test set represents a wider phenomenon, how the pandemic hasn't been just a personal matter, but a common societal threat that is linked to the work of the critical sectors in many ways. Okay, let's move on to the next theme. Exploring communication during the pandemic. As we all know, potential disinformation about vaccines or the virus can be really harmful in pandemic. Communications is critical during the crisis, and one of the critical sectors we documented was the communication of the authorities. The communications department of the Prime Minister's office launched a Finland Forward campaign, and this is part of that campaign's visual image. Jussi Toivonen is a Chief Communications Specialist at Finnish Prime Minister's Office, and I interviewed him about the national psychological resilience to crisis in COVID-19 context, and also how the Communications Department of Finnish Prime Minister's Office has tried to strengthen the national crisis tolerance with campaigns and so on. Ultimately, how the health authorities and the government authorities were trying to get their message through. On the opposing side, I guess you can say that, of the official government-run communications, there are anti-vaccine groups in Finland, and they have organized protests against the vaccination and the restrictions. While trying to paint a more comprehensive picture of the society during the pandemic, we have also documented some of these anti-vaccine and anti-restriction demonstrations by photographing and collecting items. Even though we have a clear practice collecting policy and instructions, we have discussed about the ethical aspects of this matter, such as, are we giving a platform to these groups by opening the content online in public databases, such as finna.fi? Are we spreading disinformation by doing that? Are we potentially giving a message that we endorse these views? On the other hand, if we are not going to open all the material online or display it for now, does it look like censoring? What we have done, we have opened the photographs online. They have been taken in a public space, in the street or in the squares. You can get an idea or the context of the event by looking at the photo. These photos you can see now are from a demonstration against coronavirus-related restrictions on April 10th, 2021. From our point of view, it is really important to collect the diverse aspects of society even during the pandemic. We can't and shouldn't avoid the difficult topics, but we also recognize that these themes that might be perceived harmful must be approached with caution. The material must be catalogued with care in order to get the context right. Otherwise, we promote its accessibility and open use. Okay, we are almost done. Just a few words about our latest bigger project. It was the municipal election 2021, which was the first election during the pandemic in Finland. It was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic from April to June. Advance voting lasted 2 weeks and they created new ways to vote safely. The drive-in voting and voting outdoors. These photos are from the drive-in polling station near Malmi Airport in Helsinki. The actual election day was June 13th. We documented the election by photographing and interviewing. We interviewed, for example, the people who were running the drive-in polling stations. The person in the photo below left is Vesa Kouonkorpi, and he had actually developed the drive-in voting system in Helsinki. It was quite amazing. Some of the interviews, such as the interview of the director of electoral administration at the Ministry of Justice, were done remotely. And of course, needless to say, We took extra care not to influence the voters or risk the ballot confidentiality in any way. And then we have reached the conclusion. So far we have acquired tens of items and interviews and hundreds or even thousands of photos relating to COVID-19 into our collections. But we still don't know the full impact of the pandemic yet. So we'll continue exploring and documenting the effect COVID-19 will have on our society. Collecting COVID-19 has been challenging. It is such a major and overwhelming theme. It affects everything and everyone in one way or another. It is very important still to collect and explore also the difficult themes to ensure that the image of the times we are recording is as diverse as possible. And of course, the temporal distance will bring new meanings to the material. It is somewhat comforting that we aren't doing the documentation alone. The material we have acquired and produced together with the picture collections is only a part of the huge information resource the museums and memory organizations have produced here in Finland, and of course around the world as well. I think this must be the most collected and documented pandemic ever. Okay, but that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, both for your excellent presentation as well as your work for documenting the COVID-19 here in Finland. As you said, it's probably the best documented pandemic so far. Let's hope that it's also the last one, but that's something that we cannot decide here. So next we shall have an overview from Denmark. Nice to see you, Bente, also here online. This is an overview of Danish museums and archives on the same issue, documenting the COVID-19 crisis. Ethical, legal and organizational challenges during this pandemic. And I've also learned that this presentation is based on a recent Danish survey, which gives also an outlook on Nordic countries on a wider perspective. So please, Bente, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just share my presentation. Yeah. Does it work?
We can see your presentation fine.
Okay, yeah, super. I just wanted to be sure. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Maria. It was really amazing to hear your presentation. It was really interesting. And thank you for inviting me to this webinar, where I'll share some reflections on museum and archives in Denmark collecting COVID-19 material. And I'll also give some outlooks to the other Nordic countries. And as it was said, the presentation is based on a survey we have just made in Danish archives and museums. The presentation will in the end reflect on what did the archives and museum learn, seen as ethical, legal and organizational challenges when they performed rapid response collection during the pandemic. First, some brief information about my background. I'm an archivist and an historian at the Aalborg City Archives in Denmark. The city archives are a municipal archive and hold public as well as private archives. I'm also an external lecturer at Aalborg University in Archives and Museum Studies. Of relevance for this topic, I'm a member of a national group representing archives and museums in Denmark, and one of the authors of the forthcoming report on the corona collecting situation, which will be mentioned, which is also mentioned in the title of this paper. First, a bit of the outline of the presentation. First, I will comment on the concept we've used, the unspoken ethics. The discourse in the COVID-19 collection in the Nordic countries. The word unspoken has found its inspiration in the unspoken or unwritten rules or moral values that direct our lives and our professional methods. Then I'll touch upon COVID-19 collections in Denmark in archives and museums with an outlook to Iceland, Sweden and Norway. And then jump to another kind of practice, the need for informal museum and archives networks in Denmark, which emerged during the lockdown, and how they were used to discuss and plan collections, but not to discuss ethics. Sorry. The unspoken ethics, the discourse of the COVID-19 related collections in the Nordic countries, or I must say the Danish, Swedish and Norwegian collections during the pandemic, in the communications with the public seem to be that we, the museum and archives, need to be rapid. There's a lot about speed, and I'll come back to that. Also, a mentioning of this situation is historical and unique. It's never seen before. And then there will be some historical references in Denmark, at least, to the Spanish flu in the 19th century, in the 20th century. The collection is for the future, and also the need for user involvement is expressed. Help us, help the museum and archives. It was and it is very direct communications, and in many cases it does not involve feelings or considerations. It might be a result of the way the Nordic museums and archives usually speak with or communicate with the users or audience in an everyday situation. Of course, there are exceptions where feelings and considerations are expressed, but this is the overall impression or trend I've seen. Now I'll have a look or give an outlook to the collection in Iceland, Norway and Sweden. The cases I'm going to show reflect my choices and network, and I'll apologize if there are good examples which I've left out. First, Iceland, the National Library in Iceland. Here we see a collection of memories very quickly from the start of the pandemic. It's also using the urgency or the speed as a motive. And it seems to be the classical way when what's reflected in the survey we made in Denmark to use email as a collection form. Next is Norway. And here we have the Norwegian Folkemuseum. The Norwegian Folkemuseum shows, as an example, the need of good collecting platforms during a rapid response collections. The Folkemuseum was able to react very quickly with collection because of the platform MIN.no, which is implemented in Norway already as a collection tool, and it has a twin in Sweden, as we'll see in a moment. It also means that it's very easy to set up new collections with various themes, as we see here about birth giving and semen during Corona pandemic, and very easily get in contact with the users. It's also interesting to see how the Folkemuseum have been able to use the material they have collected very quickly. And we see that in quite a lot of museum and archives, that the collected material is used for outreach and other kind of exhibition. And here we see a production of a podcast of the theme. One of the institutions in Norway which also reacted very quickly was Randsfjordsmuseet, the archives part of the museum. They created a Corona archive on Facebook. Here the process was in focus, and you could say that they facilitated communication between their users and the archives and the museum about the situation. So you could say that the communication was very much in focus, perhaps more than the content. Was content produced, now the museum have this outdoor exhibition called Together Hardeland, Hardeland is the region, about when we all stood together during the Corona. So again, you can see the material that was collected is very quickly used in the communication and as an exhibition in the museum. Another example are the museums in Akershus, who has this wonderful exhibition online, which is communication by the museum's photographer. Here you could say that the inspiration to that came through in our Danish networks, and we hacked it at Aalborg City Archives and had our photographer doing a similar project. So that could be an example of it was really important to have this communication between sectors, but also between countries when we work with this. Sweden, the examples are taken from Sweden really shows the need for overview and coordination when, as Maria also said, a lot of institutions start collecting the same theme. In Sweden, to gain an overview, Svenska Arkivförbundet had a webinar with presentation of some of the projects which were going on in Sweden. And the Svenska Arkivförbundet is now working on a practical handbook together with the National Archives in Stockholm to prepare archives and museums for a similar situation in the future. Also, the DOS network, I think quite a lot of you in Finland knows about the cooperation of museums doing contemporary collection, needed an overview and did it in a very basic form, you could say, making an open document. This document was the base for a map, which is unfortunately not online now, but we really gave a super good overview of the projects not only in Sweden but also in Norway, and you could say you could get inspiration from your colleagues in other institutions, and that also gave a possibility to contact each other during the pandemic. I found also in the Swedish context a really interesting comment on the Corona collection. Elin Nystrand von Unge, who is an ethnologist, she's describing the knowledge production in this rite of passage consisting of several elements. You could say we are perhaps in a borderline between a pandemic, some not normal situation, and normality, and everything can happen. And I'm also going to mention later that really means that we should be prepared to work in very agile ways and to all the way change the direction when the situation developed in a way we didn't foresee, you could say. But it also, as she says, require good methods, not to be home blind, being in the middle of chaos, and have good methods and theoretical perspectives. And I found that was what we in Denmark used each other, both museum and archives, to talk about which methods to use to collect in this period of time. Interesting also with Sweden, and again here we have some examples from Minnen, the Swedish version of the collection platform of memories and photos. And here you can say we are already on our way into phase 2 or 3 or 4 of the Corona pandemic, because the new collections are about reboarding. How do we get back into some kind of normality at the same time as we don't know whether there's going to be a phase 3 or 4 or whatever. Yes. Then I'll move on to Denmark. As soon as Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen on March 11 declared a totally lockdown of Denmark, a large number of archives and museums began documentation of the corona crisis, and it was from a local, a regional, and a national perspective. And you could say, why did the cultural heritage institutions immediately start collecting? The situation seemed obvious and followed the discourse I presented earlier. From the beginning, there was no doubt that the corona crisis was and is a completely extraordinary situation in history, and it suddenly changed our life, and it will affect our future very markedly. Many institutions have had ethical considerations in relation to begin a collection of evidence of a serious situation while it is taking place. In March 2020, no one knew how the pandemic would hit Denmark. The situation is now, in August 2021, that the pandemic situation is not a national disaster anymore, and it's abandoned as a national crisis. This raises a number of questions. How should the cultural heritage institutions have handled a collection from a situation of illness, death, and disaster as a result? How should the collection be communicated with respect for the situation of those who were infected? Should one, despite of the risk of losing relevant data, wait with the collection? With these considerations in mind, the report I'll present later shows that the Danish cultural heritage institutions started the collection relatively quickly in the process. But the ethic was a discussion unlike as I've seen in other countries, a thing that took place internally and in individual institutions. Why, I will conclude on later. The situation called for a national network and coordination and sharing of experiences, but not ethical questions, a lot about methods. Under normal circumstances, the archives and museum might have wanted to organize a seminar or lay out a plan to ensure good results. But, as I mentioned before, everybody wanted quick response. At the same time, archivists and museum staff worked from home, and in Denmark it was really from home. We were not allowed to go out and do our work, and not to be inside the archives and museums buildings, most of us. So we were isolated physically from each other. The solution became a network on social media, and in the Facebook group Corona Time, documentation was born. The purpose of the group was to exchange ideas and experiences, and in general to be a forum for mutual inspiration between employees in archives and museums. And as you see here, this situation really stressed the need to work across sectors, as we had never seen before in Denmark, to work archives and museums together. During the lockdown, a committee within the group arranged a number of webinars entitled Corona Team, the Corona Hour, with professional exchange between colleagues in Denmark and presentations from projects in the other Nordic countries and in England. The webinars are still available in the Facebook. The themes were, as you see on the slide, cooperation, question lists as method, and collection from social media. In just 1 week, the group gained more than 100 participants, and in the time of writing, it has 236 members, and it's open to get into the group. The majority of the members are from local and city archives, or from local and special museums, and the state institutions are also represented. It also gives a possibility to speak across not only sectors, but also across national, local, and regional focused institutions. At the same time, the activity in the group signalized that many different collection initiatives have been taken in archives and museums during the corona lockdown with different focus. but there was not made a coordination or overview by organizations or by the minister, the cultural ministry. So you could say the group compensated from below for that overview. It has turned out, perhaps as expected, as I noted in the beginning of the paper, that documenting a world with corona does not just require collection as a quick response, to borrow a concept from the English cultural heritage terminology, rapid response collection. Rapid response collections have been used in connection with the documentations of sudden terrorist attacks and disasters, but also in connection with sudden emerging social movements as Me Too. Life with corona continues and took new forms as the pandemic entered new phases. This happened quite concretely at the mink-related lockdown of 7 municipalities in northern Jutland, which is the region where Aalborg is situated. Subsequently, it was a liquidation of an entire business. My colleagues at the Green Museum in Jutland has taken the challenge to document that situation. And talking about ethics, it takes a lot of diplomacy and ethics to collect from a business and people in deep crisis, losing the work of a generation. There's a lot of family business within the mink farmers. Now I'll use my own archives and an example for collecting COVID. Usually most people associate Aalborg City Archives with history and old days. But as soon as the total lockdown of Denmark was declared on March 11, the City Archives started planning an active collection from the inhabitants in Aalborg, collecting everyday photos and account of the lives that was going to be called the Corona crisis. The idea was to ensure a local perspective on the period. So we followed the discourse I presented earlier. Why this rush? Yeah, not only because it's a crisis, but also today it's absolutely crucial to collect as history happens. In a digital world, images, videos, text messages are deleted easily. Everybody has experienced the loss. So the staff of the City Archives could and cannot lean back and wait for things to be delivered in 20 years, as we could in an analog world. It requires quick collections, especially in the case of private archives, that the archives are active, communicative, when they carry out active contemporary documentations. As a part of the collection, the archives took a facilitating role as a conversation partner with people in Aalborg on one of the archives' social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, about life during the lockdown. In order to respond to a sudden situation, it requires an organization and technological infrastructure that is geared to act quickly. In the situation, Aalborg City Archives used experiences and methods about collection and user involvement from active collection campaigns in the Nordic Research Project Collecting Social Photo. And you see the anthology here, which is online, and some of you have also heard about it because there's a Finnish partner in the Finnish Museum of Photography. The project, our project focused on the collection of social photography shared on social media. The consequence of that we had this experience meant that the City Archives encouraged people in Aalborg to share photos and considerations about their everyday lives during lockdown by using the hashtag CoronaAalborg 2020 when sharing on Instagram and in our Facebook group, or mailing directly to the archive. It's important to say that the material did not enter the archive automatically after the request. It required ongoing follow-up and dialogue with reposts and comments on both social media to motivate people to deliver the material. Around 1,000 photos were shared using this method, and here are some of the examples. We've been writing about this method in the anthology, hashtagging with the users, participatory collection on digital social photography in the anthology, which is on the slide. The City Archives also asked for diaries about Easter during lockdown with significant less luck. We observe a development which is also relevant and crucial for documenting COVID-19. In many ways, social media, photos and captions replace the diaries and letters the archives and museums used to receive. That led to that the archives has made an agreement to receive a number of lockdown diaries shared on Instagram. This new format clearly challenged the digital standards that the archives has collected so far. As at the same time, the distribution and the images and the captions shows that social media in many ways takes over the diary form as a place for sharing reflections on everyday life. One way of getting behind these considerations and motives is to do interviews in addition with the submission. The work has not finished yet. Now follows the selection of images for collection and making agreement, as was also mentioned in the former paper, with each individual archive creator. It has proved to be a great advantage to talk together across institution types, as I have mentioned, when archives and museums work with the same phenomenon, in this case, the documentation of COVID-19. Archives and museums are not the only ones collecting citizens' reactions to life during a pandemic into this time. Many media and private individuals have also taken the initiative to document the situation. A national group was formed in 2020. The task is to analyze the COVID-19 collection in archives and museums during especially the first lockdown. The group has been initiated by the Privatarkivet, the Private Archives Committee, which is not easy to translate, but it's a working group which is referring to the Danish Ministry of Culture and the National Archives dealing with questions related to private archives. I'm a member of the group representing the City Archives. In spring 2021, the initiative launched a survey to map the situation in national, local, regional museums and archives to obtain an overview of the collection work and be able to make some recommendations in order to be better prepared for a similar situation in the future in this sector. We have received 309 answers from institutions who have or have not taken initiative to collect. The answers are now being analyzed, and here I will present very briefly some of the results. First of all, the contents in archives and museum collected are mostly visual heritage, and photos are absolutely dominant. The focus in the collections are on individuals. After that comes public archives, where, for example, some municipalities have taken initiative to preserve more material from the public sector than they would have done normally. Then businesses, organizations, societies, and other. There's always also been seen how do you communicate with the people who you want to collect, and you could see here that it's of course digital platforms that are used very much. But we also see that the use of email is really going behind. Quite a lot of people are not using emails anymore, but messages and SMSs and so on. We have also asked who were cooperating with whom, and we see a lot of archives and museums working together on a local level because they are in the same cities, but also very untraditional cooperations in the cooperations with theaters and some other creative sectors. Types of cooperation. What kind of cooperations have the institution taken part in? And here we can see that the collection is the main function which people have putting across through. The next is outreach and communication. Again, collection platforms and flows. In Denmark, we don't have Minnen or Minner as they have in Norway and Sweden, and I know you also have some possibilities in Finland. That really meant that we really had to make it all up from the beginning and use social media, use email or other ways of collecting, and that's one of the things we'll point out in our report. Yes, and then there's some successes and problems. I'll come back to them when I briefly talk about the conclusions. As I said earlier in the paper, the COVID-19 case study demonstrated an overall necessity to work in agile and dynamic ways with rapid response. You have to be able to change the way you work and with whom you work and how you work very quickly. And that does not work so well in hierarchical organizations. Technology. It also emphasizes a need for new tools, as I already has said, and methods for active digital collecting with a focus on dialogue with the creator of images, documents, and objects. We lack a platform. It does not need to be the end of the curator or the archivist. On the contrary, it means, as we already have heard, that we work in a more transparent way when we take choices. Workflow. Audience engagement, outreach, communication, and collecting are merging into each other, which means that the collecting needs to be to draw on methods of audience engagement, and it has to be considered all through the collection process. The institution has to have contact with the creator very early, and in a big organization that really means that departments have to work together. Yeah, and in Denmark there are no formal networks across museum and archives when it comes to division of labor and finances, when it comes to contemporary collection, and that's the reason that Facebook from below really got that function. And then huge, as already been mentioned, juridical problems, especially in the museum and local archives, which are not allowed in Denmark to preserve personal information because of the GDPR laws, which makes contemporary collections in a digital world almost impossible. And you could say that the COVID-19 case has really given a good example to discuss how we do this in the future. And then ethics, the unspoken ethics, as the last slide. The report and the process show a need for an open discussion in Denmark about ethics, as it seems to be only existing within the organizations and implicit through the laws and regulations, as the Danish archive law, GDPR, and copyright. But it also reflects a tradition, at least in Denmark, that you don't see yourself as a subject or as a person, but you represent an institution who work within the laws I've just been mentioning, which within the laws and the regulations, there's a lot of ethics that means that are really formulated to take care of the archive creator and the people you communicate with. So in a very regulated society, it might be not a need, it seems. Yes, that was the final words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bente, for giving us a great overview on the different aspects of COVID-19 documentation in Nordic countries, including the learnings and the problems and challenges. Those are the things that will take us forward. Now it's time to discuss, ask questions, comment. We have different possibilities for that. People here in the live audience, you can raise your hand and walk to the microphone and ask questions and comment. And those of you who are watching us online, you can also raise your hand in teams and take the floor from there. We shall see how we shall manage to take you all on board, but that's how we try to do it. So anyone, I'm sure that after these two great presentations, you have plenty to ask or comment or wonder or to just say how this sounds to you. Okay, here we have the first question in the live audience. We have a microphone on the right side and left side of the auditorium. If you can take the microphone, then the online audience will also hear your question. Thank you, and please present yourself also.
Thank you for your presentations, Maria and Bente. The audience, my name is Tapio Juutinen.
Just adjusting the mic. Can you hear us, Bente, well?
Yes. Yes, my name is Tapio Juutinen. I'm the curator of Finnish Aviation Museum, located in Vantaa, and we are an example of a specialized museum in Finland. And those were very good overviews of the corona documentation, and I just wanted to say a couple of words about our documentation. So we have a quite international subject in our museum, the aviation, and we had to act quite fast during the spring 20 because of the growing restrictions of travel. And actually we made contemporary documentation around the air travel, collapsing air traffic, and while people stopped traveling abroad. And we had two target groups, the aviation professionals and the passengers. And the professionals either lost their jobs or they were laid off during the spring. And the situation is the same, of course, with many other professionals in Finland. Eventually, the air traffic and travel is now getting some of its volume back. However, it is still hard to say facts about the future. Maria, you told us about the critical side of society, nurses, and such who are overemployed under enormous pressure. What about the other side, the unemployed people? I assume their narrative have been documented earlier before pandemic, but COVID is, I assume, a new situation. We noticed that the unemployment was a taboo for Finnish airline pilots and cabin workers, and a difficult subject for documentation, I assume in other museums as well. I, however, believe that you have been doing ethical discussions about this question and develop methods. Thank you.
Would you like to answer, Maria, this question by Tapio from the Aviation Museum? You can come forward or take the other mic, whatever suits you best.
Okay, thank you, Tapio. It was really interesting to hear about your projects as well. And unemployment is quite a difficult theme. We haven't collected it a lot in this COVID-19 context. We have photographed some of the demonstrations, like the one that the cultural sector organized in June, and it's one of the sectors that have been hit really hard by COVID-19. And I think that we need to follow this situation in the months and years to come.
Thank you, Maria. Would you like to comment, Bente, on the documentation of the people who lost their jobs and became unemployed due to the COVID-19 crisis. How has that been handled in Denmark, or have you had any ethical or other discussions on this?
We have tried to get an overview of which topics that the Museum and Archives have been collecting from. But I must admit, I haven't heard anybody who's been taking, that theme into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's something to explore. Yeah, thank you. Maybe it's something to explore also in the Nordic cooperation in the future, because I've heard the words respect, sensitiveness, and this is definitely an issue where you need those words as well because of the difficulties people facing in their personal lives.
Sorry.
Yeah, you can continue.
But could say that the mink crisis I had as an example is a very huge example of a whole sector which is stopped and who's fighting for their lives, which meant that hundreds of people, especially in the northern part of Denmark where I'm sitting right now, became unemployed. And I know that the Green Museum has, as I said in the presentation, have really been working with how to deal with this. Their problem has been very much that they also wanted to give interviews, but the press have been very much faster to get into touch with these people. And that's now I'm taking into another issue which is problematic in Denmark, that in a situation like this, the press have the first right to go. And that really makes it very difficult for Museum and Archives when you come behind. People think they have told their story, but of course it will be preserved in the news archives, but when you have a focused collection, the competition with the medias and the right they have to be in front has appeared for quite a lot of institutions, mentioned that as a problem when collecting. So yes, unemployment on a very big scale, and it raised some other problems.
Yeah, and also the new situation of different sectors, maybe unemployment and then reorganization, and these questions, they are socially very important. Now we have a question in Teams. It's Laura-Lotta Andersson. Laura-Lotta, it's your turn to comment or ask question. Please.
Yes. Thank you. And I'm Laura-Lotta Andersson from the Museum of Hanko, and I'm also chairperson of the Finnish collections and contemporary collections networking group in Pool 2, Individual and Society. And our pool had last week online, we shared what all kind of things the museums had collected during this pandemic year. And also here in Finland, like it was in Denmark, it all began very rapidly. We dove into the work, and we didn't really have the time to prepare and discuss. A lot of museum personnel was working from their homes, and it was difficult to coordinate the work. But we did, here in Finland, we have the TAKO Network, which helped the museums, and we had an online discussion in May 2020 of how we should collect, and after this we collected in an Excel file all the things that the museums have done, and this was also the base for last week's program. But I wanted to ask you also about especially the survey that you had taken. I saw that there was quite a lot of photos, but also quite a lot of objects that had been collected, because nowadays collecting is here in Finland, it's more photo-based than collection-based. And then I also thought it was quite interesting that you had social media was an important platform, but also newspapers seemed to have been. And I would also like to know how you have used the newspapers. So, thank you.
Thank you, Laura-Lotta. So, Bente, how would you like to reply to Laura-Lotta?
Yeah, and first I would say that one of the very first discussions in the webinars and on the Facebook group, which was our communication platform, was really how to think Corona as an object. And there was quite a lot of people from the museums, of course, sharing what could be an object that was important to collect. So there was a bit of, this from having a development of time to really transform it into what are important objects. And I suppose you as museums are used to work that way. And you could say that it also clarified that there are two traditions within archives and museums. For example, I shared a blackboard from a cafe which said, no more coffee, we're closed because of Corona, with lights, flowers, and so on. And I thought I had collected what's happened. Then one of my museum colleagues said, oh wow, you should have collected that board for your collection. And then I had to say, well, not exactly, because I've actually already collected it because I took the photo. So that was also interesting. How the dialogue between sectors really, in a concrete way, was explored on this platform. So the thing is now, the survey is always general. Is to what our plan is really to pick out some of our colleagues and to do interviews. The idea is to make a report, as I said, and I'll try to see if we can get it translated into English, because right now it's an Danish, of course, report, but also to have the resources to do some qualitative studies about how people have handled this within and outside the institutions, and also to make an international seminar, and I suppose we would like to cooperate with the rest of you, because that could be really interesting to have focus on it. But also what I see in Denmark is there's a bit of tiredness around Corona, and we really have to get this report out soon, because people, doesn't want to talk more about it. So our focus is really now to try to say, what did we learn and what can be used in future collections together, the two sectors together, and how can we be better prepared next time something suddenly happens. That was not. That was about the social media. You asked about how to collect that. We have a good. We are going to have. We have decided a good cooperation with the Danish Internet Archive in the Royal Library in Copenhagen. So we don't do the same thing, because they harvest the Danish net pages, and people from the outside the institutions could point at on web pages they wanted them to preserve, but they don't preserve local material, and they don't preserve everything, of course, and difficult thing about the Internet Archives in Denmark is that it's a closed archive for researchers. So what we want, and as you've seen in several of the projects, and as you also said, Maria, we want to be able to do outreach, communicate, use the material now. And that's problematic when you work with a partner who's not allowed to do that. So, but we have to develop our methods, collecting new material, new digital material, and we are still thinking how to preserve our Instagram diaries, which are really super material.
Thank you, Bente. It sounds like the two sectors will continue working together, have cooperation also in the future, so that's something very positive that we've learned. I have also plenty of questions, but I will save them for some other occasion, because we have another question in the Teams, and that's, do I remember correctly? Yes, Susanne Gillberg from Lastentarhamuseo. I don't know what that's in English, but Susanna will explain. It's your turn.
That's Helsinki Kindergarten Museum in English. So yes, hi. It's been very interesting to hear all about any different aspects in collecting. Well, I work as a curator of collections in Helsinki Kindergarten Museum, and I thought I could share you briefly something about the documenting we have done. I don't have any specific question for you, but I thought I could explain a bit what we have done and about some ethical issues and how we have solved them. So our focus in collecting is early childhood education in Finland. And for example, in spring 2020, we asked the early childhood education staff to answer in our internet survey, and almost 600 people around the country answered and told us about the effects of COVID-19 and what it was like to work during the pandemic. And one possible reason for the popularity of the survey was that we reacted immediately in the beginning of the pandemic in Finland. And the staff really wanted to be heard at that moment. And all the answers were anonymous, so they couldn't be connected in any specific area or preschool or teacher or anything. But we are also interested in collecting the children's thoughts and views, not only during the pandemic, but anyway. And we are working together with the communal early childhood education center that is in the same building as our museum. And we have a research permit from the city of Helsinki, so we have the permission to collect. Following the plan we have asked the permission for. Due to data protection, we could collect something anyway, of course, but we wanted to be as open as possible and to collaborate with the city, as our main interest is the communal early childhood education. And of course, there are always many ethical issues, especially concerning the children and especially publishing the material about them. And therefore we are asking also all the parents to fill in permission forms to publish any of the material we have collected concerning the children. And we are trying to be, as said, as open as possible and work together with them as well. And also we think that it's important to try to explain things for the children as well. And they have always the opportunity to refuse to give, for example, the drawings or something else to the museum. Although in our experience, the children are very eager to tell about their thoughts if you just really start to listen to them. But that is very briefly something about how we are collecting. But it's been very interesting in hearing all the different ways. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. I think the vulnerable groups, such as children or the unemployed or people who have suffered from the crisis in a special way, are an ethical issue, definitely, that even an outsider like me can recognize in this discussion. So would you like to comment something, Bente, on this from the point of view of children or something else?
Yeah, you could say the way to reach children during the pandemic and collect their thoughts and memories are also reflected in the survey, but you should know it. And because quite a lot of archives and museums have been working together with schools. I suppose also in Finland that the big task for the kids have been to write diaries during the pandemic. and they have been collected by the museums and archives into the collection. But also, I mean, kindergartens in Denmark are mostly municipal. That meant that the city archives, which collect the municipal archives from kindergartens, have been focused some places on getting extra material from that group because of the same reasons as we just heard.
Thank you. I think we are all getting new ideas and questions and thoughts and would like to continue, but our time is beginning to end and we need to go on to our separate ways soon. At this point, I would like to thank you all for participation, both here at the museum. It's so nice to be able to see people who are sitting in an auditorium, though they are having masks, and that probably makes them a bit more passive than normally. But it's so nice to see you all, and also to have this wide audience online. And special thanks to our speakers, Maria and Bente, and for the welcoming words also to Alexandra and Johanna. And for these questions by the participants at the end. And not to forget also the organizational team who is sitting here and tapping their computers eagerly and watching that everything's going fine. So the session in English ends here. Ohjelmassa seuraa nyt tauko. Next we have the break. And after that we shall continue in Finnish. Joten siis jatkamme suomenkielistä seminaaria kello 14 samassa seminaarilinkissä. Järjestäjät heittää nyt mua jollain, jos mä sanon jotain väärin. Tämä Teams-osuus päättyy nyt tähän. Ja striimissä siis tavataan kello 14. Ja tervetuloa silloin jatkamaan kiinnostavan ohjelman parissa. Kiitän nyt omasta puolestani ja toivotan teille hyvää seminaaripäivän jatkoa. Thank you. Bye.